You may not be officially diabetic, but you could have one or more factors going on in your life that make you at risk for diabetes. And what are those factors? We'll talk about that. Well, here's a comment from an individual who seems to be a little bit critical about the fact that I push a very low carbohydrate diet and suggest that it is totally unhealthy to eat the level of carbs that we do these days. They write this: rice, corn, wheat provide half the calories to feed 7.9 billion people. No way we can all eat healthy, and they put that in quotes. Half would starve. Well, yeah, if it came to a choice between starving or eating a diet full of carbs, then yeah, I would do that. I don't believe that is really a choice that too many have to make. You say, how could you say that, Dennis? You're an American. You don't know anything about what goes on in the other parts of the world. Well, I've been around a little bit. I've traveled to Africa dozens of times. I've been in India many times, Philippines, many different countries. And yeah, I know that carbs are cheaper and they're easier to purchase and package. And so it's definitely more of a struggle for some to try to eat low carb than for others. And maybe where you live and with the money you have available and what's available at the market, you may not be able to get down to 20 grams of carbs per day or 40. But you can definitely slash the carbs. And, like I said, I've been to Africa many times. One of the things you can do is eat more nuts and more dairy. And a little bit more meat. If you can't afford a lot more meat, just eat what you can. There are ways to do it. And I frequently hear from Africans who tell me they have gone low carb. Now, their version of low carb may not be my version of low carb, but for them it's low carb, and they're finding good results. So the basic premise behind really everything I'm saying is we are overdosing as a world, as a population in our planet, little planet Earth. Little in the compared to the universe, we are overdosing on carbohydrates, and we need to find a way to cut them as much as we can. And obviously, you can't do what you cannot do. So if with your limited money and where you live, you say, well, Dennis, there's no way I can get down to 40 grams. Well, can you get down to 100 grams? Because for many people, to go from 300 grams of carbs per day down to 100 would be a significant improvement, and you would see tremendous results with your blood sugar levels. So you do what you can, and there are going to be some ways. So again, nuts and seeds would be one way. Cheese often is available. There are going to be some ways. So you do what you have to do. All right, well, here's another person that says, I don't drink tea or coffee. Do you have comments about drinking Postum occasionally? I found this interesting. He says, I've also used broth. I love your show. Thanks for sharing. I've learned a lot from you. But the question I want to address is, do you have any comments about drinking Postum? Well, that caused the wheels to turn, and I thought back to many, many years ago. Seems like a lifetime ago. When I was just a young man in my 20s, I drank Postum sometimes. And some of you are saying, what in the world is Postum? Well, I think they quit making it for a while, and now they're making it again, or somebody's making it again. And when I thought about Postum, my first thought was, well, if I'm not mistaken, that's a grain beverage. They're using grain to make a kind of a fake coffee. And I think they put in a little molasses flavor or some chicory. I'm not sure what all they put in it, but I thought, well, that can't be too good. It's a grain product. However, I looked it up. Sure enough, they are making Postum now, coffee substitute, doesn't have caffeine. And lo and behold, it doesn't have many carbs. The nutritional information that I got from it was that it had 2 grams of carbs per serving. And one of those grams was fiber. So 1 net gram of carbs for a spoonful of Postum in your coffee or in your hot water. And you've got a coffee substitute. So the answer is, Postum seems to work. Now, I don't know how a grain product like postum can be so low in carbs. I'm not sure, other than the fact that you're not getting all that much. But in any case, that could work if you can get postum. I don't know that everybody can. You can get it on Amazon. I looked that up. So anyway, I may have to try that sometime and see. I was never crazy about it, but there were times when I wanted to do something that I felt was healthier than coffee and didn't have the caffeine. And back in my 20s, I did drink it fairly regularly, and then finally gave it up, and then they quit making it for a while. Now they're back. Here's another question. Who is at risk for diabetes? Well, that's an easy answer these days, and the answer is everybody. Everybody that lives in any kind of a culture or a country that eats a standard high-carb diet is at risk for diabetes. Some people are at more risk than others. So let me tell you who's at more risk than others, but we all are. And one of the things I've found out as I've talked to diabetics and corresponded with diabetics is that there are some that they say, well, nobody in my family was diabetic, and here I am. And if you went back about 4 generations to great-great-grandpa, you'd find out almost nobody from that generation was diabetic. There were a few type 1s and maybe a few type 2s, but not many. So things have changed dramatically. So if you could go back in a time machine and live like they did 150 years ago, you would not be at risk. Most of you would not be at risk to be diabetic. As it is, living in this generation, and particularly if you live in a culture and a country that employs the standard diet like America, really like almost everywhere. I'm tempted to talk about Britain and Australia and Europe, but the reality is even if you go into what used to be called the developing countries or third world countries, they have imported so much junk over there into Africa, into Asia, and so forth. They're at risk as well. India is exploding with diabetes, and Africa is exploding with diabetes. So who is at risk? Well, everybody. But if we want to go beyond that, let me just give you a few categories of people that are especially at risk. Number 1, anybody with a large belly. If your stomach is large, you are at risk for diabetes. Now, you may say, well, doc says I've got an A1C in the 5s. Doc says my fasting glucose is not diabetic, so I guess I'm okay. Well, you may be okay according to those standards, but you're still at risk, and you may be probably are experiencing very high glucose spikes. If you've got a big stomach, there's excellent chances that when you eat high-carb meals, you're bumping up close to 200. Now, you may go back down fairly quickly, so that your next morning's fasting glucose isn't bad and your A1C isn't bad. But when you're bumping up close to 200 after meals, it's just a matter of time before it gets you. So if you've got a large stomach, you are at risk. Just look down at your belly, and if it protrudes very much, you're at risk. Another category would be anybody over 40. When you're 22, especially if you're on the thin side, not much likelihood that you're diabetic. Probably not insulin resistant either, although you could be. But once you get over 40, you are at risk. So really anybody who's over 40 ought to have a glucose meter and ought to be testing themselves post-meal along with some fasting tests in the mornings before they eat, but also post-meal to see how high am I spiking. And really, if you're spiking over 150, you are at risk. Okay, another group would be, well, I mentioned the spikers. If you spike, you're at risk. If you have parents or siblings that are diabetic, you're at risk. If you eat a lot of sweets, if you have a sweet tooth and you eat a lot of sugary desserts and sweets and candy and so forth, drink a lot of Coke, you're at risk. Doesn't matter whether mama had diabetes or not. If you eat a lot of junk like that, you are at risk. And in many cases, it's just a matter of time. But here's the tragic thing. Even if you go all your life and avoid becoming officially diabetic. And so here you are, 70 years old. The doc says, well, I'm a little concerned about your glucose, but you're not diabetic yet. You're at 6.1 A1C. Or your fasting glucose is at 109. Those are not diabetic numbers according to American standards. But it it means you've got insulin resistance, you've got metabolic syndrome, and you could be damaging yourself. And once again, you might not die of diabetes. When you die, they may not write down died of diabetic complications because your last A1C said you weren't diabetic and your last fasting glucose said you weren't diabetic. But had you checked your spikes, you'd find out you definitely have insulin resistance. And so you die of a stroke or you die of a heart attack at 68 years old, and they don't write down that you're diabetic or you died of diabetic complications because you were never diagnosed that way, but you had enough insulin resistance. It was causing all kinds of issues. So we want to err on the safe side, and we do not want any trace of insulin resistance. I want to announce an exciting new format that will be added to my Bible teaching channel, which goes by my name, Dennis Pollock. Most of my uploads have been on Mondays, where I post videos that I call Video Devos. These are short talks that focus on one particular Bible topic. And I'll continue to post these Video Devos on Mondays, but now I'm adding a new type of video that will be posted on Thursdays. These will involve Bible studies that Benedict and I will do at our dining room table. We'll be going through various books or sections of the Bible in a relatively short, easy-to-digest, user-friendly format. So catch the Video Devos on Mondays and the Bible studies with Ben and me on Thursdays. I believe you'll be blessed.